The sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Rachel Morgan stood clutching her infant daughter Lily to her chest, her free hand holding tight to 3-year-old Mia's small fingers. A warm summer breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and opportunity, but Rachel's stomach knotted with anxiety. 3 months ago, she'd been Rachel Williams' chemistry teacher with a comfortable suburban home. Now she was just another divorcee with empty pockets and 2 young daughters depending on her for everything. Mia tugged at Rachel's threadbare sundress, her brown eyes wide with boredom and fatigue. The toddler had been remarkably patient through the first hour of the county property auction, but her tolerance was waning. Lily, just 8 months old, slumbered against Rachel's shoulder, blissfully unaware of their precarious circumstances. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the courthouse lawn, announcing the first property, a 3-bedroom ranch with a tax lien. Rachel watched as bidding quickly escalated beyond anything she could afford. Her entire net worth sat in her wallet, $73 and change. It might as well have been 73 cents for all the good it would do here. Rachel's mind drifted back to that final explosive confrontation with Daniel just 3 months earlier. His face contorted with rage as he towered over her while she clutched baby Lily, who wailed at the commotion. Mia had wrapped herself around Rachel's legs, trembling. The memory of Daniel's words still burned. "You've never supported my vision. Always questioning, always worrying about money. My business would have succeeded if you just believed in me." What he'd never mentioned, Nettie, were the mounting debts he'd hidden, the second mortgage he'd taken without telling her, the credit cards maxed out funding his latest doomed venture. The foreclosure notice had been the final blow, stripping away their last pretense of stability. One by one, properties sold to investors and locals with actual money. Rachel remained, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was simple desperation. They had nowhere to go after the motel money ran out next week. Or perhaps it was the stubborn determination that had carried her through the divorce, refusing to accept there wasn't some way forward. The auctioneer's voice broke through her thoughts. Item 14, mountain cabin on 5 acres, Taylor Ridge. No utility structure, in severe disrepair. Opening bid $500. Silence fell over the crowd. Even the bargain hunters seemed uninterested in a dilapidated cabin miles from nowhere. 200. The auctioneer's voice dropped, seeking any interest. Hun, still no takers. 50. Anyone? Rachel felt a sudden, inexplicable certainty wash over her. Without planning to speak, she called out, "I'll give you 50 cents. Laughter rippled through the crowd. A man in an expensive suit smirked, whispering something to his companion that made them both chuckle. The auctioneer squinted in her direction, clearly trying to determine if she was serious. 50 cents, ma'am. This is a legal auction, not a joke." Rachel straightened her shoulders, ignoring the heat creeping up her neck. "I have 50 cents, and you have no other bidders. The county wants this property off the tax rolls, don't they?" More laughter, but the auctioneer conferred briefly with a county official. Rachel held her breath. This was madness. A cabin with no electricity, no running water, miles from civilization. But it was shelter. It was something they could own outright, something no one could take away. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sold to the lady for 50 cents. Please see the clerk for paperwork." The wealthy man who'd been laughing earlier approached as Rachel fumbled in her purse for 2 quarters. His tailored suit probably cost more than she'd made in a month of teaching. The gold watch on his wrist gleamed in the afternoon sun. "You do realize you've just bought a worthless pile of rotting timber, right? That place hasn't been inhabited since old Carter disappeared decades ago. You'd be better off sleeping in your car." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is bet everything on nothing at all." The man, his name badge read Edward Prescott, Heritage Mining Corp., shook his head, walking away with a dismissive wave. Rachel turned to find Mia watching her with wide eyes. "Are we really going to live in a cabin in the mountains?" Rachel pressed the deed into her pocket, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life or somehow found their salvation. "We're going to try." The drive to Taylor Ridge took nearly 2 hours, the last 40 minutes on a rutted dirt road that threatened to shake their aging Honda Civic apart. With each mile, civilization fell away. First the suburbs, then the small towns, then even the scattered farmhouses, until there was nothing but dense forest and the occasional dirt track branching off the main road. Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter, ignoring the warning signals from her rational mind. This was madness. She'd brought her children to the wilderness with no plan beyond a desperate gamble on a 50-cent shelter. Her ex-husband would have a field day if he knew more evidence of her impulsive decision-making that he'd cited during custody hearings. The GPS lost signal 20 minutes ago. Now they navigated by the crude map the county clerk had sketched on the back of their deed. Turn left at the lightning-struck pine, the clerk had written. Rachel spotted the twisted blackened tree and steered the car onto an even narrower track. Mia pressed her face against the window, unusually quiet. Lily had woken and begun fussing in her car seat, hungry and uncomfortable after the long drive. "Are we there yet?" Mia asked for the 10th time, her small voice tinged with weariness. "Almost, sweetheart. Just a little further." The motel had been bad enough, thin walls carrying arguments from neighboring rooms, the constant worry about their dwindling funds. But at least it had electricity running the water, a connection to the world they knew. This felt like driving off the edge of the map. The track curved sharply around a massive boulder, and suddenly their new home appeared through the trees. Rachel's heart sank. Cabin was a generous description for the structure before them. A small single-story building with a sagging roof and boarded windows. The porch listed dangerously to one side, rotted steps leading up to a door secured with a rusted padlock. "Home sweet home," Rachel muttered, forcing optimism into her voice. "It's a fixer-upper, but it's ours. No rent, no mortgage, just a place to catch our breath and figure out next steps." She parked the car, and they approached cautiously, stepping over fallen branches and knee-high weeds. Rachel tried the padlock, finding it solid despite the rust. The key from the county clerk, an old iron thing that looked like something from a historical museum, fit surprisingly well. The lock opened with a reluctant screech. The smell hit them first. Musty air thick with decades of abandonment. Rachel pushed the door wider, letting sunlight spill into the dim interior. Dust motes danced in the beams, illuminating a space that was surprisingly intact despite its neglect. The main room served as both living area and kitchen, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A doorway led to what appeared to be a bedroom at the back, and a narrow ladder suggested some kind of loft space above. Rachel stepped inside, testing the floorboards. They creaked, but held firm. The roof had leaked in several places, evident from water stains on the wooden ceiling, but the bones of the structure seemed sound. Handcrafted beams supported the roof, their joinery speaking of skilled craftsmanship from another era. Mia sneezed as she entered, disturbing decades of dust. The little girl's face scrunched up in confusion. "It's dirty and dark. Where are the lights?" "No electricity, no running water," Rachel explained gently, kneeling to meet her daughter's eyes. "Like camping, remember? We'll use lanterns and flashlights." "But how will we watch cartoons or take baths?" Mia's bottom lip trembled. "We'll adapt, sweetie. People lived without modern conveniences for thousands of years." Rachel stroked her daughter's hair, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "I know about chemical purification from teaching, and there must be a water source nearby. No one builds a cabin without access to water." She moved to the boarded windows, working her fingers under the edge of one plank. The wood gave way, easily rotted by years of exposure. Sunlight flooded the room, revealing details hidden in the gloom. A wood-burning stove in the kitchen area, shelves built into the walls, a handmade table shoved against one corner. More importantly, she could now see that while neglected, the cabin wasn't destroyed. The structure was solid, the damage primarily cosmetic. "We'll need to fix the roof before anything else." Rachel mentally cataloged the tasks ahead, the impossibility of their situation temporarily overwhelmed by practical considerations. "Get the chimney inspected to make sure we can safely use the fireplace. Find the water source and test it for safety." Mia wandered toward the back room, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious exploration. Lily had calmed in Rachel's arms, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Mommy, come look at this." The bedroom was smaller than the main area, with built-in shelves along one wall and a window facing east toward the ridge. Like the front room, it showed signs of abandonment, but not destruction. Mia was examining the windowsill, her finger tracing something carved into the wood. "WC1 1967. She read carefully, sounding out the letters and numbers Rachel had been teaching her. "What does that mean?" Rachel ran her hand over the carefully carved letters. "Someone's initials, I think. Someone made this place their home once. We can do it again." They spent the remaining daylight hours taking inventory of their new home and immediate surroundings. The property included about 5 acres of wooded land that sloped down toward a creek about 200 yards behind the cabin. The water ran clear and cold, though Rachel collected samples in empty water bottles to test later. A dilapidated outhouse stood at a discreet distance from the cabin, its structure questionable but potentially salvageable. Inside, they swept decades of dust and debris from the floors, uncovering solid hardwood beneath. They removed the remaining boards from the windows, allowing cross-ventilation to clear the musty air. The furnishings were sparse but serviceable: the table and 2 chairs, a metal frame bed with no mattress in the bedroom, shelves and hooks built into the walls for storage. As the sun began to set, they unrolled sleeping bags on the freshly swept floor of the main room. Their car contained everything they still own: clothes, a camp stove, some basic tools, and the few personal items they'd managed to keep through the financial collapse of their previous life. Tomorrow they would bring it all inside, but tonight they were too exhausted from the day's discoveries. Rachel's chemistry teacher background had already proven valuable, helping her assess their most critical needs. Water, shelter, heat, food. The hierarchy hadn't changed since prehistoric times. The creek provided water, though she'd need to verify its purity. The cabin offered shelter, albeit in need of significant repairs. Heat would come from the fireplace and wood stove, assuming both could be made operational. Food remained the most pressing ongoing concern, with their limited funds needing careful rationing. Lying in her sleeping bag as darkness enveloped the cabin, Rachel pulled out her worn leather journal, a birthday gift from Daniel before everything fell apart. Its pages now contained careful lists and calculations tracking every expense and mapping their uncertain future. By the light of a battery-powered lantern, she began a new entry: Day 1 at Taylor Ridge. Cabin better than expected, solid foundation, good bones. Roof needs immediate repair, 3 leaks identified. Creek approx. 200 yards south appears clean, but requires testing. Outhouse structurally questionable, but workable. No sign of wildlife intrusion in cabin. Priorities: 1. Roof repairs. 2. Window sealing. Fireplace, chimney inspection. 4. Water testing. Sustainable food plan. She closed the journal, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night. In the city, there had been constant background noise: traffic, neighbors, air conditioning, the hum of electronics. Here the silence was occasionally broken by the call of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant gurgle of the creek. Different, but not necessarily worse. Beside her, both girls' breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. Despite everything, they seemed to take each new challenge in stride. Their resilience was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Children shouldn't have to be this adaptable, this understanding of adult failures and limitations. Yet here they were, sleeping peacefully in an abandoned cabin because their mother had spent their last 50 cents on a desperate gamble. Rachel's scientific mind never stopped calculating probabilities, and she knew the odds were stacked against them. But for the first time since the divorce, they had something that was truly theirs. Not borrowed, not rented, not held at the mercy of someone else's decisions. That had to count for something. The morning light filtered through the uncovered windows, casting geometric patterns across the wooden floor. Rachel woke with the sun, a habit formed over the past difficult months when every hour mattered in the scramble to rebuild their lives. Lily was already awake beside her, cooing softly and reaching for her mother's face with pudgy fingers. Mia still slept, curled in her sleeping bag, her dark hair falling across her forehead. Rachel allowed Mia this peace, knowing the day ahead would demand much from both of them. She scooped up Lily and moved quietly to the porch, where the early morning air carried a sharpness that cleared her head. Standing on the porch, which was more stable than it had appeared yesterday, Rachel surveyed their property. The forest pressed close on 3 sides, mostly pine and oak, with undergrowth creating natural boundaries. To the east, the land opened up, slightly offering a view across the valley to distant ridges layered in blue haze. Lily babbled happily in her arms, seemingly unfazed by their new surroundings. At 8 months, her world was wherever her mother and sister were. Rachel envied that simplicity. She made her way to the creek, listening to the forest wake around her. Birds called from the canopy, unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth, and the constant music of running water grew louder as she approached. The creek itself was about 8 feet wide, running over smooth stones with occasional deeper pools. Rachel knelt beside one such pool, dipping her hand into the cold water. Her chemistry knowledge would be useful here, testing for contaminants, understanding how to purify water for drinking, recognizing potential hazards. Returning to the cabin, she found Mia awake and examining the stone fireplace with curious hands. The hearth was solid, built from river rocks carefully fitted together without mortar. The chimney appeared intact, though Rachel made a mental note to check for cracks or blockages before risking a fire. "I'm hungry," Mia announced, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Let's set up the camp stove on the porch and make some breakfast," Rachel suggested. "Then we can explore some more." Together they explored the cabin more thoroughly in the revealing morning light. The main room's dimensions became clearer, about 20 feet square, with the kitchen area defined by the wood stove and a dry sink along the north wall. The back bedroom was roughly half that size, with the built-in shelves and the window bearing the carved initials. The ladder they'd noticed yesterday led to a small loft space under the peak of the roof, just large enough for storage, or perhaps a sleeping area for Mia once they checked its structural integrity. As they moved a heavy cabinet to better access one of the windows, Mia's beloved stuffed rabbit fell behind it. When Rachel helped her retrieve it, they discovered a folded paper that had been trapped behind the cabinet. The yellowed sheet contained a single line of faded handwriting: "The treasure isn't beneath the ground, but within it." "What does it mean?" Mia Bunyam asked, her eyes wide with sudden excitement. "Is there treasure here like pirate gold?" Rachel examined the cryptic message, turning it over to find the page blank otherwise. Could be nothing. Someone's philosophical musings, or maybe related to mining. These mountains have a history of silver mining. She tucked the paper into her journal, filing away the mystery for later consideration. Their immediate concerns were far more practical than riddles left by previous occupants. They spent the morning retrieving their belongings from the car and setting up the camp stove on the porch for a simple breakfast. Rachel had packed their remaining food with care: oatmeal, dried fruit, canned beans, rice, pasta, powdered milk. Enough to last 2 weeks if they were careful, by which time she needed a plan for replenishment. After eating, they began the most urgent task: assessing the roof damage. From inside, they'd identified 3 distinct leaks, but the full extent of the problem required external inspection. With no ladder tall enough to reach the roof, Rachel cautiously climbed onto the hood of their car, then used the porch roof as a step to reach the main roof. "Stay right there where I can see you," she instructed Mia, who sat on a blanket with Lily nearby in a portable playpen they'd brought from their former life. The wooden shingles were in worse condition than she'd feared. Many were rotted through completely, others hanging loose and ready to fail with the next rain. Rachel inched her way across the sloped surface, testing each section carefully before putting her weight on it. "Mommy, will this really work, living here?" Mia called up, her voice small with uncertainty. Rachel paused, considering her answer carefully. The odds were against them, but she refused to burden her daughter with the full weight of adult worry. "It's going to be hard work, but yes, it can work. People have lived in places like this for centuries. We're just rediscovering old skills." From the roof, she could see farther across their property in the surrounding wilderness. No other cabins were visible, though smoke from a distant chimney suggested they weren't completely alone in these mountains. The isolation was both blessing and burden. No prying eyes to judge their unconventional choices, but also no immediate help in case of emergency. As she shifted to examine another section of damaged shingles, Rachel felt the roof give way beneath her foot. The rotted wood cracked, and suddenly she was sliding, scrambling for purchase on the slippery surface. Her fingers caught the edge of a more solid section, but her legs dangled over the side, kicking uselessly at air. Mia screamed below, and Lily, startled by her sister's cry, began wailing in chorus. The sound of her children's terror gave Rachel a surge of desperate strength. She pulled herself up, only to have another section of roof collapse under her hand. With no choice left, she pushed away from the roof and dropped the 8 feet to the ground, landing awkwardly and feeling a sharp pain shoot through her ankle. She lay there for a moment, stunned by the fall and the pain. Then Mia was beside her, small hands patting her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mommy, Mommy, are you dead?" Rachel forced herself to sit up, wincing at the throbbing in her ankle. "I'm okay, sweetie. Just a little hurt. Help me over to Lily, please." Leaning on her daughter's shoulder, she hobbled to the portable crib where Lily continued to cry. Rachel lifted the baby, holding both children close as her heart rate gradually returned to normal. The reality of their situation hit her with brutal clarity. If something happened to her out here, her children would be alone, helpless, with no one to even know they were in trouble. "We need to be more careful," she whispered as much to herself as to Mia. "No more roof climbing without proper equipment." By evening, Rachel had bound her ankle tightly, thankfully sprained rather than broken, and fashioned a temporary patch for the roof using a tarp from the car secured with rocks. It wouldn't hold through a serious storm, but it would buy them time. Inside, while examining the floor where the girls would sleep, Rachel noticed an uneven board that shifted slightly under pressure. Curious, she worked her fingers under to the edge and lifted. The board came away easily, revealing a small space beneath the floor where previous occupants might have stored valuables. It was empty now, but the discovery gave Rachel an idea for hiding Carter's mysterious note and any other significant findings away from prying eyes. As darkness fell, Rachel sat at the crude table writing in her journal by lantern light, planning their trip to the nearest town tomorrow to find supplies for proper roof repairs. Mia had transformed an empty cardboard box into a house for her stuffed animals, her resilience once again amazing her mother. "Mommy, who do you think lived here before?" Mia asked as Rachel tucked her into her sleeping bag later. "I'm not sure. Someone named WC, according to those initials we found. We'll have to be detectives and figure it out." "Like Scooby-Doo," Mia's eyes lit up. "Are we looking for clues exactly like that? But first we need to make our home safe and comfortable. Then we can solve mysteries." After both girls were asleep, Rachel returned to her journal, adding a final note: "Our needs are basic but urgent. Money almost gone. Must find work in town, whatever's available." Strange feeling about this place, like we were meant to find it. Or it was meant to find us. The note about treasure, meaningless scribble, or something more, bigger mystery. Who was WC? And why did they abandon this place? She dozed fitfully that night, dreams filled with falling and chasing and the sensation of being watched. Once she woke suddenly certain she'd heard footsteps on the porch, but when she listened, there was only the whisper of wind through the trees and the soft breathing of her daughters beside her. The trip to Pineville the next day proved both challenging and enlightening. The small town was the nearest settlement, a mining community turned tourist stop about 22 miles from their cabin. Rachel's ankle throbbed with every push of the pedal, and managing two small children while limping through stores drew curious glances from locals. The hardware store owner, a weathered man named Jim Cooper, raised his eyebrows when Rachel mentioned Taylor Ridge. "You're living in old Carter's place. That cabin's been empty since the early 70s. Most folks figured it would collapse into the ground eventually." Rachel purchased roofing materials and basic supplies, stretching their limited funds as far as possible. "Do you know anything about Carter?" The initials WC are carved in one of the windowsills, dated 1967. Jim leaned against the counter, his expression contemplative. "William Carter, geologist or mining engineer, something like that. Showed up here in the mid-60s, kept mostly to himself. Smart fellow by all accounts, but odd. Spent all his time in the mountains mapping and taking samples. Then one day he just wasn't around anymore. What happened to him? Some say he struck it rich and moved away. Others think he had trouble with mining companies wanting his research. The most likely story is he just died up there alone." The librarian offered more concrete information when Rachel inquired later that day. The local history section contained several references to William Carter, including a newspaper article from 1965 announcing his purchase of the Taylor Ridge property, described as previously owned by the defunct Taylor Mining Company. A photograph accompanied the article, a lean, serious man with intelligent eyes and premature gray at his temples. The caption identified him as William Carter, formerly of Denver, Colorado, now residing in Pineville. Rachel made photocopies of the relevant articles, adding them to her growing collection of information about their cabin's previous occupant. The mystery of William Carter provided a welcome distraction from their immediate challenges, a puzzle to solve between the endless tasks of making their shelter habitable. The following weeks fell into a pattern of hard physical labor and incremental improvements. Rachel replaced damaged roof shingles, sealed windows with plastic sheeting, cleared brush from around the cabin, and established a reliable system for collecting and purifying creek water. Each day brought new challenges and small victories, their bodies growing stronger as they adapted to mountain living. Rachel began homeschooling Mia, using their surroundings as a living classroom. Botany lessons involved identifying edible plants in the forest. Physics came alive through the mechanical advantage of levers and pulleys used in their repair work. Chemistry found practical application in water purification and understanding the properties of materials they salvaged. The balancing act of caring for an infant while repairing a cabin and teaching a 3-year-old strained Rachel to her limits. Often she worked with Lily strapped to her chest, the baby alternating between sleeping and watching the world with curious eyes. Mia became her little helper, fetching tools and holding things steady with her small hands. The toddler's vocabulary expanded rapidly, filled with new words like shingle and beam and mortar. Their cabin gradually transformed under their care. The roof no longer leaked. The windows admitted light while keeping out drafts, and the fireplace passed Rachel's careful inspection, providing warmth as autumn brought cooler temperatures. They scavenged materials from abandoned structures deeper in the forest. An old hunting camp yielded a serviceable mattress for the metal bed frame, while a collapsed shed provided usable lumber for repairs. Each evening, Rachel documented their progress in her journal, the pages filling with practical observations, expenses tracked to the penny, and notes about William Carter gleaned from town visits and discoveries within the cabin itself. The mining journals proved particularly interesting, containing detailed observations about geological formations throughout the region, with special attention to silver deposits. One crisp October morning, as Rachel worked to reinforce the sagging porch with Mia, helping by sorting nails into size piles, and Lily napping inside a pickup truck, rumbled up their dirt track, the first visitor since moving to the cabin. A gray-haired woman emerged, regarding them with open curiosity. "I'm Margaret Taylor. My family owned this mountain before the mining company bought it back in the 30s. Heard in town someone was living up here again." Rachel introduced herself, and the girls, conscious of her worn jeans and work-roughened hands. Margaret's gaze took in the repairs, the neatly stacked firewood, and the garden they'd started with seeds from the hardware store. "You've done more with this place in a month than anyone expected. Most folks thought you'd give up after the first rain." Margaret became a regular visitor, bringing occasional treats, fresh eggs from her chickens, apples from her orchard, advice about surviving mountain winters. More importantly, she brought stories about William Carter, whom she had known personally. Carter was running from something, though he never said what. Brilliant man knew more about these mountains' geology than folks who'd lived here all their lives. He was convinced there were untapped silver deposits throughout this region, spent years mapping and sampling, documenting everything with scientific precision. "Why didn't he file mining claims?" Rachel asked one afternoon as they sat on the now sturdy porch, watching Mia collect colorful autumn leaves while Lily practiced crawling on a blanket nearby. Margaret shrugged. "Said something once about responsible development versus corporate exploitation. I gathered he had ethical concerns about how mining was conducted. Wanted to ensure any silver found would benefit local communities rather than distant corporations." These conversations added depth to Rachel's understanding of the mysterious WC, whose presence seemed to linger in the cabin despite his long absence. His bookshelves still held technical volumes on geology and mining. His handcrafted furniture bore the marks of careful craftsmanship. Even the layout of the cabin, oriented to capture maximum sunlight, positioned near the creek, but safely above flood level, spoke of thoughtful planning. As October progressed, Rachel's attention turned to winter preparations. Margaret's warnings about mountain snowfalls added urgency to their work. They gathered and split firewood, insulated the cabin's walls with materials salvaged from the abandoned hunting camp, and constructed a cold storage area for preserving food. Their financial situation remained precarious. Rachel's small divorce settlement had nearly run out despite her careful rationing. She began taking odd jobs in Pineville, tutoring high school students in science, helping at the hardware store during busy periods, editing technical documents for a small engineering firm that maintained an office in town. These jobs provided barely enough income for essentials, with nothing left for luxuries or emergencies. On a particularly cold afternoon, as Rachel worked to reinforce the outhouse before winter storms arrived, with Mia helping by handing her tools, the little girl's stuffed rabbit tumbled through a crack in the floor. "My bunny," Mia cried, reaching for her beloved toy. As Rachel leaned in to retrieve it, her weight shifted against a rotted floorboard that gave way suddenly, nearly sending her tumbling through the structure. Mia grabbed her mother's shirt, helping Rachel regain her balance. "Careful, sweetie," Rachel cautioned, recovering from the near fall. "Let me see if I can reach it." Kneeling beside the hole, Rachel directed the beam of her flashlight into the space beneath the outhouse. What appeared to be a small metal footlocker sat nestled against one of the foundation posts, partially concealed by dirt and debris. The structure had been built directly over this hidden container, suggesting intentional concealment rather than coincidence. "What is it, Mommy?" Mia asked, trying to peer around Rachel's shoulder. "I'm not sure yet. Let me see if I can get it out without breaking anything else." With careful maneuvering, they managed to extract the locker without further damaging the outhouse. The metal was tarnished but intact, secured with a padlock that had succumbed to decades of rust and exposure. A firm twist with pliers broke the corroded mechanism, allowing the lid to open with a reluctant creak. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth bundles carefully sealed against moisture, lay a collection of documents, maps, and what appeared to be ore samples. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the first bundle, unwrapping the protective covering to reveal papers that had maintained remarkable preservation despite their age and hiding place. Mining claim certificates prepared but never filed. Detailed topographical maps with locations marked using symbols and coordinates. Letters written in a careful hand addressed but never sent. And beneath it all, a leather-bound journal with the initials WC embossed on the cover. "William Carter," Rachel whispered as Maya watched wide-eyed. "So that's who WC was." "We found the treasure," Mia asked, picking up a small leather pouch that had fallen from the stack of documents. Inside were dozens of rock samples, each labeled with coordinates and dates. Several displayed the distinctive metallic gleam that Rachel recognized from her chemistry background. Silver ore and apparently high-grade specimens based on the visible content. They carried their discovery back to the cabin, spreading the contents across the handmade table for proper examination after putting Lily down for her afternoon nap. The maps revealed a landscape mapped with scientific precision, elevations, water sources, geological formations, all documented with professional skill. Several locations were marked with symbols that, when cross-referenced with Carter's journal, indicated silver deposits of varying richness. The journal itself provided the narrative context for these technical documents. William Carter had indeed been a mining engineer from Denver, part of a family mining business he had abandoned for reasons initially unclear. He had purchased the Taylor Ridge property specifically for its proximity to geological formations he believed contained untapped silver deposits, and based on the samples and documentation, he had been correct. Rachel turned the pages of the journal with growing fascination, reading Carter's neat handwriting by lantern light as Mia examined the maps and samples, carefully arranging the shiny rocks and patterns on the floor. Carter's early entries focused on technical observations or quality vein thickness, extraction challenges. But as the journal progressed, his writing became more philosophical, questioning the ethics of mineral extraction and expressing concerns about environmental impact. June 15, 1967. The silver content in today's samples exceeds anything previously documented in this region. Conservative estimates suggest commercial viability far beyond initial projections. Yet I find myself increasingly concerned about what mining operations would do to this landscape. The standard extraction methods would devastate the watershed for decades to come. August 3, 1967. Another letter from Northwest Mining Corporation today. Their offers grow more substantial with each communication. They sense the value of my research, but understand nothing of its broader implications. To them, these mountains represent only profit margins and shareholder value. October 17, 1967. Made the decision today to withhold my findings from public record. Instead of filing claims immediately, I will complete the documentation and preserve everything for future consideration. Perhaps in time, extraction technologies will advance to permit responsible development. Until then, the silver remains safer in the ground than in corporate ledgers. The final entries describe Carter's methodical concealment of his research, the careful wrapping of documents, the construction of hiding places throughout the property, the decision to leave sufficient clues that someone committed to the place might eventually discover what he had found. I leave this record for whoever follows, whenever that may be. The silver deposits documented herein are real and substantial. They represent wealth that could transform lives, but only if approached with respect for the land that holds them. May whoever finds these papers understand that true value lies not in extraction alone, but in responsible stewardship. Rachel closed the journal, her mind racing with implications. William Carter had discovered commercially viable silver deposits throughout the region surrounding their cabin. He had documented everything necessary for legal claims, then deliberately hidden that information rather than sell it to corporate interests or exploit it himself. And now, through pure chance, a 50-cent auction bid, a rotted floorboard, a stuffed bunny falling through a crack, that information had come to them. Does this mean we're rich? Mia asked, looking up from her arrangement of silver-flecked rocks. Rachel looked at the materials spread across the table, the culmination of one man's life work, potentially worth millions if the silver deposits were as substantial as Carter's documentation suggested. Yet the journal also contained clear warnings about the ethical complexities of mineral extraction concerns that resonated with her own environmental awareness. It means we found something important, something William Carter thought was worth protecting. We need to understand exactly what we've discovered before making any decisions. She opened her own journal, making notes with the methodical precision that had become her anchor through uncertainty, found hidden documents from William Carter W.C., detailed maps of silver deposits throughout region, mining claim certificates prepared but never filed, journal expressing ethical concerns about extraction methods, need to research, current mining law, environmental regulations. 3. Verification of deposit locations, or legal status of potential claims after 50-plus years. That night, after both girls had fallen asleep, Rachel remained at the table reading more of Carter's journal by lantern light. His words painted a picture of a man caught between practical opportunity and ethical principle, between personal gain and environmental concern. The parallels to her own situation were impossible to ignore. Financial desperation balanced against long-term consequences, immediate needs against future responsibilities. The hidden documents represented possibility, a way out of their financial precarity, perhaps even prosperity. But they also represented responsibility to the land, to the community, to Carter's clearly expressed wishes for responsible development. The path forward wasn't as simple as filing claims and cashing in. Rachel fell asleep at the table, Carter's journal opened beside her own. She dreamed of silver veins running through mountain stone of water, flowing clear over precious metals, of a legacy preserved for 50 years before finding its way into desperate but careful hands. The next morning brought clarity and purpose. After breakfast, Rachel outlined a plan to Mia, her teacher's instinct for structured problem-solving asserting itself. First, we need to understand modern mining law and environmental requirements. Then we'll verify some of Carter's deposit locations to confirm his documentation's accuracy. Only then can we make informed decisions about how to proceed. Their next trip to Pineville included a visit to the county courthouse, where Rachel researched current mining regulations and property records. The clerk, initially dismissive of her questions, became more helpful when Rachel mentioned William Carter by name. Carter, the old hermit from Taylor Ridge. There's been speculation about him for decades. Some folks believed he found significant silver deposits, but refused to file claims for environmental reasons. Others thought he was just another eccentric with geologist delusions. The records revealed that no active mining claims existed for the areas marked on Carter's maps. If his documentation proved accurate, the deposits he discovered remained legally unclaimed, potentially available for new filings under current law. However, the process for establishing new claims involves substantial filing fees, environmental impact studies, and ongoing maintenance costs, all beyond Rachel's current financial capacity. At the library, Rachel found information suggesting silver prices had increased tenfold since Carter's time, making even modest deposits potentially valuable. The economic equations Carter had calculated in the 1960s would need complete recalculation based on current market values and extraction costs. Armed with this preliminary information, Rachel, Margaret, and the girls spent the following weekend hiking to the location Carter had marked as his most promising discovery, a site near Willow Creek about 3 miles from their cabin. The hike proved challenging, with Lily strapped to Rachel's chest and Mia alternating between excited exploration and tired complaints, but Margaret's steady presence and knowledge of the terrain made it possible. Following Carter's detailed maps, they found the exact outcropping he had documented, complete with the small cairns he had built to mark sampling locations. The site itself took Rachel's breath away, a natural amphitheater of stone where water had carved through layers of quartz and granite, exposing veins of mineral deposits clearly visible even to their untrained eyes. Using Carter's journal descriptions, they identified the characteristic signs of silver ore, collecting small samples that matched those in the leather pouch they'd discovered. Mia moved through the site with growing excitement, her initial weariness forgotten as she collected sparkly rocks under Rachel's supervision. It's all exactly where he said it would be, Margaret marveled, examining a vein of silver-laden quartz. The cairns, the outcropping, everything. Carter really did find silver and lots of it based on these veins. Rachel examined the site with more measured enthusiasm, noting both the apparent richness of the deposits and the pristine nature of the surrounding ecosystem. Carter's ethical concerns became more understandable as she observed how mining operations would impact the watershed. The creek that provided their drinking water flowed directly from this area, connecting them intimately to any future development. On the hike back to the cabin, they discussed the implications of their discovery. The silver deposits were real, potentially valuable, and apparently unclaimed. But pursuing mining claims would require resources they didn't have, expertise they would need to acquire, and decisions about responsible development that honored both their needs and Carter's expressed wishes. I think we need legal advice, Rachel concluded as they approached the cabin. Someone who understands mining law and can help us navigate the complexities. The sight that greeted them stopped the conversation abruptly. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked in front of their cabin, and a man in an expensive suit stood on their porch examining the repairs they'd made with critical eyes. With a jolt, Rachel recognized him, the wealthy man who had mocked her 50-cent bid at the auction. Mia moved closer to her side, suddenly shy. Who is that? What does he want? Rachel squared her shoulders, conscious of the rock samples in her backpack and the maps safely hidden inside the cabin. The man represented exactly the type of interest Carter had sought to avoid: corporate calculating, focused on extraction without consideration for consequences. I don't know, she whispered, adjusting Lily's weight against her chest. But we're about to find out. As they approached, the man turned, his expression shifting from critical assessment to practiced charm. His smile never reached his eyes, which remained cold and evaluating as he extended his hand. Mrs. Morgan, what a surprise to find you've actually made this place livable. I'm Edward Prescott of Heritage Mining Corporation. I believe we met briefly at the auction. Rachel maintained her composure, though her mind raced with questions. The Prescott name connected to Heritage Mining, one of the largest mining corporations in the region, known for aggressive extraction practices and minimal environmental consideration. Mr. Prescott, what brings you all the way up our mountain road? His smile widened, revealing two perfect teeth. Just checking on potential investment opportunities in the area. My company has historical interests in these mountains dating back to my grandfather's time. We're considering reactivating some of those interests, which might impact neighboring properties. His gaze swept over the cabin, the newly reinforced porch, the garden they had established with such effort. You've put considerable work into this place. Admirable, if perhaps misguided. This region has significant mineral potential that a small residential holding can't properly develop. The implication was clear. Their presence was an inconvenience to corporate interests, their 50-cent cabin an obstacle to extraction plans. Rachel thought of Carter's journals, his detailed documentation of silver deposits, his ethical concerns about corporate development. The parallels were too precise to be coincidental. We're quite happy with our home as it is, Mr. Prescott. Not every value can be measured in mineral rights or corporate profits. His expression hardened momentarily before the professional smile returned. Of course. Still, should you ever reconsider your situation, my company would be interested in purchasing your property. We could offer substantially more than your current investment. He handed her a business card, the expensive paper stock incongruous against her work-roughened hands. Something to consider as winter approaches. These mountains can be unforgiving to the unprepared, especially for a single mother with such young children. I understand the authorities take a dim view of homes without proper utilities when small children are involved. The implied threat lingered in the air as he returned to his vehicle. The powerful engine disturbed the mountain quiet as he departed, leaving Rachel with Margaret and the girls on the porch, the business card burning in her palm like a poisonous thing. That man's as subtle as a rock slide, Margaret muttered, bouncing Lily gently to calm the baby, who had grown fussy during the tense exchange. The Prescotts have been trying to control these mountains for 3 generations. Rachel watched until the SUV disappeared around the bend, her mind connecting pieces of a puzzle that suddenly seemed much larger and more complex than before. He knows about the silver, doesn't he? He must suspect Carter found something valuable. More than suspects, I'd wager. His grandfather was Richard Prescott, who ran the mining company that competed with Carter's family business back in the 60s. There's history there, bad blood that's never settled. Inside the cabin, Rachel retrieved Carter's documents from their hiding place beneath the loose floorboard in the bedroom. Together with Margaret, they spread the maps across the table, examining them with new understanding. Several of the deposits Carter had documented most extensively fell within areas that would have been owned by the original Taylor Mining Company. If Heritage Mining had acquired those historical interests, they might have legal standing to pursue mineral rights throughout the region, except where valid competing claims existed. Carter's unfiled documentation represented exactly that possibility, competing claims based on his detailed geological work. Claims that Rachel might now be positioned to file if she could navigate the legal and financial requirements. The visit from Edward Prescott transformed their discovery from an interesting historical find to an urgent strategic consideration. Corporate interests were actively pursuing the very resources Carter had documented and chosen to protect. The 50-cent cabin had placed Rachel and her daughters directly in the path of powerful economic forces. Mia traced one of Carter's maps with her finger, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "The bad man wants our treasure, doesn't he? The sparkly rocks." Rachel opened her journal, making notes with renewed purpose. The cryptic message they'd found weeks earlier suddenly acquired new meaning. The treasure isn't beneath the ground, but within it. Not a philosophical musing, but a literal description of silver deposits waiting to be claimed by those who understood their value and their responsibility. Visit from Edward Prescott, Heritage Mining, clearly interested in mineral rights throughout region. Potential connection to original Taylor Mining Company. Carter's documentation now appears strategically significant, not merely historical. Next steps: 1. Consult mining law. Attorney 2. Assess financial requirements for filing claims. 3. Determine environmental impact of responsible development. Consider Carter's ethical framework as guideline for decisions. Margaret helped Rachel put the girls to bed, then prepared to leave. At the door, she paused. "You need to be careful, Rachel. The Prescotts aren't known for subtlety or fairness when they want something. My sister's married to a lawyer who specializes in environmental law, Samantha Liu. She might be able to help you understand what you're facing." The following day, Rachel noticed a vehicle parked where the main road met their dirt track, a black SUV, identical to Prescott's. As they passed on their way to town, the driver made no attempt to hide his surveillance, deliberately raising a camera with a long-range lens. Mia waved innocently from her car seat, unaware of the implications. "They're watching us now," Rachel observed, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The implied threat was clear. Their movements were being monitored, their interest in Carter's legacy noted. Corporate pressure had begun even before they'd taken any concrete action. Back at the cabin, Rachel carefully hid Carter's documentation beneath the loose floorboard in the bedroom. The most valuable papers, the deed of trust and the unfiled mining certificates, went into a waterproof container buried beneath the woodpile. Carter had understood the value of hiding important information. They would follow his example. That evening, Rachel made a decision that would shape everything that followed. "We're going to file a claim on the Willow Creek site, just one to establish legal standing. If Carter's documentation is as valuable as I believe, we can leverage that single claim to protect the larger territory. One claim they might afford if they depleted their meager savings and stretched their resources to the breaking point. One claim to test the legal waters and determine whether Carter's unfiled certificates could be converted to valid modern rights. The path forward required careful planning. Margaret's sister, Samantha Liu, agreed to help prepare their application, working for a reduced fee with the understanding that successful claims might lead to more substantial compensation later. She drove out to visit the cabin, inspecting Carter's documentation with growing excitement. This is extraordinary work, far beyond what most professional surveyors produce even today. The level of detail in his geological assessments would cost tens of thousands to replicate now. What you've found could save you enormous expenses if you decide to pursue mining claims. The technical explanation that followed tested the limits of Rachel's understanding. Modern mining claims required precise documentation of mineral deposits, environmental impact studies, filing fees, and ongoing maintenance to remain valid. Carter's work provided the geological foundation, but they would still need to navigate complex regulatory requirements and substantial costs. The filing fees alone would be about $500 per claim, Samantha explained, tracing one of Carter's map sites. Then there are survey verification costs, environmental assessments, and legal expenses. We're talking at least $10,000 to establish even a single claim properly. A mountain of money they didn't have. Rachel's stomach tightened as she calculated their current resources, barely enough for winter supplies, let alone speculative mining claims. But there's something else you should consider, Samantha continued, turning to a different section of Carter's materials. These maps and assay reports aren't just scientifically valuable, they're historically significant. Carter was documenting these deposits at exactly the time the original Taylor Mining Company was collapsing. There might be complicated ownership questions here that could work in your favor. Samantha's suggestion to start with historical research sent them to county archives housed in the basement of the Helena courthouse. There, amid dusty ledgers and faded property records, the pieces of William Carter's story began falling into place, and the picture was far more complex than they had imagined. Carter hadn't been merely a solitary prospector documenting silver deposits. He had been an heir to the Carter Family Mining Consortium, a significant operation with holdings throughout the region. Property records showed the consortium had been in bitter competition with Taylor Mining Company during the 1950s and early 1960s, with both entities claiming mineral rights to overlapping territories. Most striking was a deed of trust dated 1965, the same year Carter purchased the cabin. The document named William Carter as sole heir and beneficiary of all mineral rights landholdings and business interests previously held by the Carter Family Mining Consortium. Rachel stared at the faded document, trying to process its implications. Carter hadn't been running from failure. He'd been running from inheritance. He'd walked away from a family mining empire, choosing isolation over exploitation. But why? The answer emerged from correspondence archived alongside the property records. Letters between William and his brother, Richard Carter, revealed escalating conflict over the direction of the family business. William had opposed partnerships with larger mining corporations, arguing for sustainable practices and community benefit. Richard had pushed for expansion and profit maximization, eventually allying with Northwest Mining Corporation, the same company Carter's journals mentioned, approaching him about his silver surveys. The final notice in the archives, dated December 1968, delivered the most shocking revelation. Your continued absence from required estate proceedings will result in forfeiture of inheritance rights. Legal presumption of abandonment will take effect January 1, 1969, unless you appear before the probate court to contest this action. Carter had chosen to forfeit his inheritance rather than participate in mining operations he considered environmentally destructive. He had abandoned millions in family wealth, but preserved the knowledge of where valuable minerals lay, knowledge he hoped would eventually reach someone who would use it responsibly. Samantha Lou's expression grew increasingly grim as they pieced together the historical narrative. Now, the present situation makes more sense. Heritage Mining, Edward Prescott's company, acquired the remnants of both Taylor Mining and Northwest Mining through a series of corporate mergers in the 1990s. They've likely been searching for Carter's documentation for decades, knowing he had mapped deposits their predecessors couldn't locate. The drive back to the cabin felt charged with new significance. What had begun as a desperate 50-cent gamble for shelter had evolved into something far more complex. They had stumbled into a decades-old conflict between corporate mining interests and one man's environmental principles. Approaching the turnoff to their property, Rachel noticed a vehicle parked where the main road met their dirt track, a black SUV identical to Prescott's. As they passed, the driver made no attempt to hide his surveillance, deliberately raising a camera with a long-range lens. Not even pretending to be subtle, Samantha observed her legal mind already calculating how to document this harassment. Rachel maintained a neutral expression until they were well past her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The implied threat was clear. Their movements were being monitored, their interest in Carter's legacy noted. Corporate pressure had begun even before they'd taken any concrete action. Back at the cabin, they carefully hid Carter's documentation beneath the loose floorboard in the bedroom. The most valuable papers went into a waterproof container buried beneath the woodpile. Carter had understood the value of hiding important information. They would follow his example. That evening, while the girls slept, Rachel and Samantha discussed strategy at the kitchen table by lantern light. Filing a claim on Willow Creek would establish legal standing, but would also alert Heritage Mining to the extent of their knowledge. It would transform their quiet existence into direct opposition to corporate interests. You need to understand what you're getting into, Samantha warned. Heritage mining has resources. You can't imagine legal teams, political connections, ways of applying pressure that never quite cross the line into illegality. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? Rachel looked toward the bedroom where her daughter slept. What choice do I have? This cabin is all we have. If Prescott wants us gone, he'll find a way to make that happen unless we can establish some legal protection. Carter's documentation is our only leverage. 2 weeks later, Rachel returned from gathering firewood to find fresh tire tracks leading to their cabin. Nothing inside appeared disturbed, but the feeling of violation lingered. Someone had been there examining their home, perhaps searching for the very documents they'd so carefully hidden. The next day brought more direct intimidation. A county vehicle arrived unannounced, an official in a pressed uniform, informing them that an anonymous complaint had triggered mandatory environmental and safety inspections of their property. The inspection found nothing actionable. Rachel's scientific background had ensured their water purification system and waste management practices exceeded requirements, but the message was clear. Their actions were being watched, and administrative harassment could be deployed at will. These corporate pressure tactics might have worked against isolated individuals, but Rachel and her daughters were no longer alone. Margaret Taylor arrived the following morning with news that spread like wildfire through the community. Heritage Mining had filed preliminary paperwork for large-scale mining operations throughout the region, including areas near watershed sources for several communities. Suddenly, Rachel's potential claim represented more than her personal interests. It became a potential legal obstacle to corporate extraction plans that threatened local water supplies. Their 50-cent cabin had placed them at the center of a conflict much larger than themselves. Samantha's warning came through Margaret's secure channel. They are building a case for a custody intervention. They'll argue that the cabin's lack of modern utilities constitutes neglect, especially during winter months. We need to document how you're meeting the girls' educational and developmental needs. Despite the unconventional setting, the threat to their family bond transformed abstract corporate pressure into deeply personal violation. Rachel channeled her fear into systematic documentation of Mia's homeschooling progress, their adaptation to mountain living, and the supportive community connections they'd established. Margaret provided a sworn statement about the girls' evident health and happiness. Jim Cooper documented Mia's growing proficiency with practical skills that many adults lacked. Most powerfully, Rachel began maintaining a detailed journal of her daughter's development, creating contemporaneous evidence that directly contradicted any corporate narrative of neglect or deprivation. 20 days into the preparation process for their mining claim, Rachel received a call from Daniel Williams. Her ex-husband's voice carried an unfamiliar note of concern mixed with opportunism. "I've been contacted by someone from a mining company. They mentioned you're living in some kind of shack without running water or electricity. Is that true, Rachel, with our girls?" His practiced outrage barely concealed the real message. Someone had reached out to him, offered something valuable in exchange for his cooperation. "Our home is perfectly safe and appropriate, Daniel. The girls are thriving. When was the last time you even asked about them? 6 weeks ago, 7. A pause on the line then. "I'm filing for emergency reconsideration of custody. My lawyer says I have grounds based on inadequate living conditions. This isn't about money, it's about what's best for Lily and Mia." The line went dead, leaving Rachel shaking with rage and fear. The threatened custody challenge was the most insidious form of corporate pressure, using her greatest vulnerability, her love for her daughters, as leverage to force her compliance. Samantha confirmed Rachel's suspicions when she reviewed the custody filing. This reeks of corporate fingerprints. The language about inadequate utilities and exposure to extreme environmental conditions is boilerplate from similar cases where resource companies have used family courts to clear obstacles. And the timing is too perfect. Daniel suddenly cares about living conditions right when Heritage files preliminary papers. As if to underscore the coordination, Rachel discovered that Daniel's lawyer was from the same prestigious firm that represented Heritage Mining in regulatory matters, an unlikely coincidence that Samantha documented carefully for potential ethics violations. The custody hearing was scheduled with unusual speed, another sign of influence behind the scenes. With less than a week to prepare, Rachel threw herself into documenting every aspect of their mountain life that supported the girls' well-being. photo evidence of their healthy meals, Mia's educational progress, the safety measures throughout the cabin, the community support network they'd established. Rachel spent sleepless nights preparing, often finding herself at the table before dawn, writing by lantern light, compiling evidence that her unconventional choices were beneficial rather than harmful. During one such morning vigil, Mia padded out from the bedroom in fuzzy slippers, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Why are you always writing, Mommy?" Rachel pulled her daughter onto her lap, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I'm telling our story, sweetie, about how we found this special place and made it our home." Mia's small fingers traced the edge of Rachel's journal. "Is it because of the bad man? The one who wants our sparkly rocks?" Children absorbed everything, understood more than adults often credited. "Partly, yes. Some people think we shouldn't live here, that it's not a good place for you and Lily. I'm writing to show them how wrong they are." Mia's expression turned serious, her 3-year-old face suddenly ancient with understanding. "But we're happy here. This is our home." The simple truth spoken with absolute conviction, perhaps the most powerful testimony Rachel could offer. The morning of the custody hearing arrived with a crystalline October chill. Rachel dressed the girls in their nicest outfits, packed a bag with snacks and toys, and drove the familiar route to town, her heart pounding with each mile. They had survived so much divorce, near bankruptcy, rebuilding a life from nothing but a 50-cent cabin, only to face losing each other over someone else's greed. When they arrived at the county courthouse, Rachel was stunned to find the parking lot filled with trucks and cars she recognized from Pineville. Jim Cooper stood at the entrance, along with Margaret the librarian, the owner of the small cafe where Rachel sometimes worked, and at least 20 other community members. "What are you all doing here, showing the judge who your real community is?" Jim replied, adjusting his worn cap. "Figured it might help to have faces behind all those statements we wrote." Inside, the support continued. Daniel had arrived with his lawyer, an expensively dressed woman with a sharp expression, only to find himself received coolly by courthouse staff. His attempts to secure last-minute coffee met with equipment malfunctions at the cafeteria. His cell phone mysteriously lost reception within the building, while everyone else's worked fine. Small-town justice had its own mechanisms, invisible but powerful, the collective response of a community that valued relationship over corporate influence. The hearing itself revealed how thoroughly Heritage had overplayed its hand. Rachel presented comprehensive documentation of her daughter's educational progress, physical health, and emotional well-being. Community members testified to their evident happiness and development. Most decisively, the social services representative, who had conducted the welfare check, testified that while the living situation was unconventional, it showed no signs of neglect or endangerment. In fact, the representative noted that Rachel's innovative solutions for water purification and solar heating demonstrated exceptional resourcefulness and attention to safety. The family court judge was unimpressed by Daniel's sudden concern after months of minimal contact. His pointed questions revealed the externally motivated nature of the filing. Who provided the legal resources for this emergency petition? What specific evidence of endangerment prompted this sudden action? Why are you represented by a corporate law firm specializing in natural resource litigation rather than family law? The petition was dismissed with prejudice, the judge noting that any future filings would require substantial change in circumstances and evidence of actual, rather than hypothetical concerns. This decisive defeat of one aspect of Heritage's pressure campaign energized the community coalition and strengthened Rachel's resolve. The corporation had revealed its willingness to attack her family bonds, confirming every ethical concern Carter had expressed in his journals. With the custody threat neutralized, Rachel and Samantha refocused on the mining claim itself. Heritage's formal challenge required detailed response connecting Carter's historical documentation to current legal standards. The coalition's resources made possible the expert witnesses and technical analyses that would have otherwise been beyond reach. 28 days into the preparation process, with their response to Heritage's challenge nearly complete, Mia made a discovery that would transform their legal position entirely. While playing treasure hunters in the woods near the cabin, she found what looked like a small door built into a hillside concealed by decades of forest growth. "Mommy, I found a secret house for fairies," she called excitedly, her small hands already working to clear away fallen leaves. What Mia had discovered was a carefully constructed observation post overlooking the main approach to the cabin. Inside the small shelter, Rachel found a waterproof container wedged into a crevice between rocks containing an old video camera and several sealed tapes. Rachel's hands trembled as she connected the camera to the small generator they used for essential electricity. The screen flickered to life, revealing William Carter himself waiting in what was recognizably their cabin's main room, though decades younger and better maintained. If you're watching this, it means you found my documentation and decided to pursue the mining claims I was never brave enough to file myself. I hope you understand what you're getting into, because the people who want to control these mineral rights won't give up easily. The video continued for nearly an hour. Carter methodically explained his geological work, his family history, and his decision to forfeit inheritance rights rather than participate in environmentally destructive mining operations. He provided detailed testimony about specific sites, ore quality, and extraction considerations that would meet modern environmental standards. Most critically, he addressed the legal questions directly. These claims I'm documenting are legitimate and legal. I have surveying credentials from the Colorado School of Mines, and my geological assessments have been verified by 3 independent laboratories. More importantly, I've designed mining plans that would extract valuable minerals while preserving the landscape for future generations. The video concluded with Carter's direct statement of intention: "I'm preserving this information instead of filing claims myself because I've seen what happens when mining companies prioritize profit over community welfare. The damage they cause lasts for generations, long after the valuable minerals are extracted and shipped away. I'm trusting that whoever finds my work will understand that mineral wealth should serve local communities, not distant shareholders." Samantha Liu's reaction to the video evidence was immediate and decisive. "This changes everything." Carter created contemporaneous testimony specifically to support future claims based on his work. It establishes his competency, validates his geological documentation, and provides clear evidence of his intentions. We need to submit this immediately as supplemental evidence. The timing proved critical. Heritage Mining had filed last-minute additional challenges introducing complex legal theories about successor rights and inherited corporate interests. Carter's video testimony directly addressed these claims, explaining precisely why he had chosen to forfeit his inheritance rather than allow his family's mining interests to be absorbed by larger corporations. As the preparation process concluded, both sides prepared for the court hearing that would determine the validity of mining claim number 224136. Heritage Mining marshaled an impressive legal team, 6 attorneys specializing in different aspects of mining, law, corporate succession, and property rights. Their strategy relied on overwhelming the opposition with procedural complexity and technical challenges. Rachel's coalition countered with focused expertise. Samantha Liu led their legal representation, supported by specialists in environmental law and historical mining claims. The Community Fund provided resources for expert witnesses who could validate Carter's geological work according to modern standards. The courtroom itself reflected the community dimensions of the conflict. Local residents filled the public seating, their presence a silent statement of support for the principles Carter had preserved and Rachel now championed. Heritage's representatives sat isolated in their expensive suits, corporate authority carrying little weight in this mountain courthouse, where relationships still mattered more than financial power. Judge Margaret Stone was known for careful attention to legal detail and impatience with corporate intimidation tactics. Her preliminary questions suggested she understood the broader implications of the case beyond the specific mining claim at issue. "Mr. Williams," she addressed Heritage's lead attorney, "your client claims superior rights to mineral deposits based on partnership agreements with Richard Carter. Please explain how those agreements remain valid after Mr. Carter's death in 1970 and the subsequent dissolution of the family mining consortium." The corporate lawyer's response was technically proficient, but legally unconvincing. Heritage's claims depended on a series of contract amendments and successor agreements that had never been properly executed, or recorded documents that existed in corporate archives but lacked official validation. "Your Honor," Samantha countered, "we have video testimony from William Carter himself explaining why he forfeited his inheritance rights and what he intended for his geological work. His documented intention was to preserve these mineral deposits for community-based development rather than corporate exploitation." Carter's video played on a large screen that dominated the courtroom. His voice carried an authority and authenticity that no amount of corporate legal maneuvering could counter. It was the actual prospector speaking from personal knowledge about mineral deposits he'd spent decades documenting. The geological evidence is overwhelming, Carter said in the recording. These silver deposits are real substantial and accessible, but they should be developed by people who understand that the land itself is more valuable than anything you can extract from it. Judge Stone's questions following the video focused on technical details about mining law and environmental requirements, but her tone suggested she was impressed by the thoroughness of Carter's work and the legitimacy of Rachel's claim to continue it. Ms. Morgan, the judge addressed Rachel directly, you understand that approving your mining claim will establish precedent for community-based mineral development throughout this region. Rachel straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of the moment. Yes, Your Honor. That's exactly what William Carter intended and exactly what our community supports. And you're prepared to meet all environmental requirements and community impact standards. We've already prepared detailed environmental plans that exceed current legal requirements. Our goal is to prove that mineral extraction can enhance rather than damage local communities. The judge's ruling came swiftly and decisively. The court finds that William Carter's documentation provides legitimate foundation for new mining claims, that his video testimonies establishes clear intention for community-based development, and that Heritage Mining Corporation has failed to prove superior rights to the disputed mineral deposits. Mining claim number 2224136 is hereby approved and recorded. The courtroom erupted in cheers from community supporters, while corporate lawyers huddled to plan their inevitable appeals. But Judge Stone's ruling had established legal precedent that would be difficult to overturn. Community claims based on legitimate geological work would receive equal consideration with corporate development proposals. We won, Mia whispered. Her expression caught between amazement and relief as Rachel gathered her close. Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand, aware that their victory extended far beyond personal gain. Carter won. We just had the courage to finish what he started. As they left the courthouse surrounded by celebrating supporters, Rachel looked back at the Heritage Mining legal team packing their expensive briefcases with tense efficiency. The corporate machine had encountered something its resources couldn't simply overwhelm: a community united around principles that valued long-term relationship over short-term profit. Their 50-cent cabin had become the unexpected fulcrum for a shift in power dynamics that would reshape mineral development throughout the region. What had begun as desperate shelter had evolved into a platform for demonstrating that another approach was possible, one that balanced extraction with protection, profit with preservation. Carter's video testimony had provided more than legal vindication. It had given them his personal blessing for continuing his work, transforming their accidental discovery into purposeful inheritance. His final recorded words would remain with them as they moved forward. Take care of these mountains and they'll take care of you. That's the only wealth that really matters. That evening back at the cabin, they had fought so hard to defend. Rachel tucked her daughters into bed with a newfound sense of security. Lily, oblivious to the day's significance, fell asleep quickly, her small face peaceful in the lantern light. Mia, however, sensed the change in their circumstances. The bad men can't take our home now, right? Rachel smoothed her daughter's hair, considering how to explain complex legal realities to a 3-year-old. They'll try other ways, but we're much safer now, and we're not alone anymore. Mia nodded solemnly, processing this information with the particular gravity only small children can manage. Mr. Carter is helping us, isn't he? Even though he's not here anymore. Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Carter left us a gift, and now it's our job to use it wisely. After the girls were asleep, Rachel sat on the porch in the crisp autumn air, watching stars emerge above the ridge. The legal victory had established their right to stay, but it also committed them to a path Carter had only theorized, proving that mining could be conducted in harmony with environmental protection and community benefit. The next phase would require different skills, different resources, different alliances. But for tonight, she allowed herself to simply exist in the moment of triumph, to feel the validation of choices made in desperation but defended with principle. The mountain stood silent around her witnesses to a cycle of conflict and resolution that spanned generations. The 50 cents that had seemed so desperate an investment had purchased not just property but perspective, recognition That true value often hides beneath superficial assessment, awaiting discovery by those willing to look deeper. Carter had understood this when mapping silver deposits others overlooked. Rachel had embraced it when bidding on a cabin others dismissed. This shared insight formed the foundation of their approach to both mineral extraction and community development, looking beyond immediate surface value to deeper possibilities requiring commitment, knowledge, and ethical framework. The silver beneath these mountains had always been there waiting not just for discovery, but for responsible stewardship, aligning extraction with preservation, immediate benefit with long-term sustainability. In her journal that night, Rachel made a single entry. We didn't just win a legal case today. We accepted a legacy and all the responsibility that comes with it. 6 months after Judge Stone's landmark ruling, Taylor Ridge had transformed beyond recognition. The February sun cast diamond reflections across fresh snow as Rachel Morgan inspected the solar array newly installed on the cabin's south-facing slope. What once seemed an impossible luxury, reliable electricity now powered essential appliances and communication equipment inside their renovated home. The leaky roof that had nearly broken her ankle and spirit that first summer was now properly shingled and insulated against the mountain winters. Sealed windows kept the bitter cold at bay, while framing postcard views of the pristine landscape. But the physical improvements paled compared to the organizational transformation underway. The Carter Resource Cooperative, formed in the aftermath of their legal victory, had grown from concept to functioning entity with remarkable speed. Today would test their fledgling organization like never before their first full-scale extraction operation at Willow Creek. "Ready, Mommy?" Mia appeared in the doorway, bundled in a down jacket and snow pants, her cheeks already flushed with excitement, despite not yet stepping into the cold. At nearly 4, she had embraced mountain life with the remarkable adaptability only children possess, developing self-reliance that continuously amazed visitors from town. "Almost, sweetie. Just checking if Jim got the equipment set up properly." Rachel adjusted her clipboard and surveyed the landscape one more time. "Can you ask Margaret if she's ready to watch Lily while we're at the site?" Inside, Lily, now 14 months old, toddled unsteadily across the cabin's refinished hardwood floors, guided by Margaret Taylor's watchful hands. The elder woman had become an essential part of their lives, a surrogate grandmother whose mountain wisdom complemented Rachel's scientific approach. "I've been managing children since before you were born," Margaret chuckled, waving them toward the door. "We'll be fine here. This little one and I have plans to make blueberry muffins, don't we?" The drive to Willow Creek took only 20 minutes now that the access roads had been improved through cooperative effort. Rachel noticed how Mia's gaze tracked each familiar landmark, the lightning-struck pine, the massive boulder that marked the final turn, the creek crossing where they'd first gathered water samples. The child's connection to this landscape ran deep, informed by both scientific observation and imaginative play. At the site, a dozen community members worked with focused precision, setting up the specialized equipment designed according to Carter's meticulous notes, but adapted with Rachel's chemical expertise. Unlike conventional mining operations that scarred mountainsides with industrial-scale disruption, their approach targeted specific deposits with minimal surface impact. "The filtration system is giving us trouble," Jim Cooper reported, leading Rachel to where 3 workers struggled with an array of interconnected filters. "We followed Carter's designs exactly, but the water pressure isn't building properly." Rachel examined the system, tracing the flow path with practiced eyes. This represented the most ambitious aspect of their operation, a graduated filtration process designed not just to prevent contamination, but actually improve downstream water quality by removing historical pollutants. Carter's design assumes summer water temperatures, Rachel realized, inspecting a pressure gauge. "The creek's running colder now, changing the fluid dynamics. We need to recalibrate the intake valves and add heating elements to these sections." The technical modification took 2 hours, with Mia helping by sorting tools and asking endless questions about water chemistry. When they finally activated the system, clear water began flowing through the sequence of filters, each removing progressively finer contaminants before returning to the stream with minerals and chemistry carefully balanced to match natural conditions. "Look at this clarity reading," Rachel said, holding up a water sample against her testing chart. "Better than baseline, we're actually removing sediment and trace metals from historical mining upstream." A spontaneous cheer rose from the workers. This wasn't just a successful extraction operation. It was proof of concept for everything Carter had envisioned decades earlier: resource development that improved rather than depleted environmental quality. By late afternoon, they had processed the first batch of silver-bearing ore, producing a modest but significant yield that would fund further operations and community initiatives. The real victory, however, lay in the water quality measurements taken downstream, confirmation that their approach worked not just in theory, but in practical application. As they drove back to the cabin, Mia clutched a small vial containing their first refined silver, carefully labeled with the date and coordinates. "Are we rich now, Mommy?" she asked, turning the vial to catch the fading light. Rachel considered how to explain the complex reality to a 4-year-old. Not the way some people think about being rich. We have enough now for food and clothes and making our home better. But what we're really doing is showing people a different way of getting silver without hurting the mountains. Like Mr. Carter wanted. Mia nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. Exactly like Mr. Carter wanted. The following weeks unfolded in a flurry of activity as the cooperative established operational protocols and governance structures. Every Thursday evening, committee meetings occupied the renovated Grange Hall in Pineville, once a simple community gathering space, now functioning as headquarters for their ambitious project. Rachel quickly learned that managing the cooperative's scientific operations while raising 2 young children required organizational skills beyond anything her teaching career had demanded. She relied increasingly on the community childcare rotation, where members' families took turns watching the children during meetings and work shifts. The silver concentration in Section C exceeded projections by 15%, Jim Cooper reported during the March operations meeting. But more importantly, downstream water quality measurements continue to show improvement. The modified filtration system is capturing historical mining contaminants more effectively than we anticipated. Rachel added her own findings. The site rehabilitation is progressing faster than expected too. Native vegetation is already returning to areas we disturbed during the initial setup, partly due to the improved soil amendments we're applying during reclamation. The cooperative had established strict criteria for sustainable extraction, minimal surface disturbance, comprehensive site restoration, and most importantly, measurable improvement in environmental metrics after operations concluded. These standards derived directly from Carter's journals, but incorporated modern scientific methodologies and Rachel's chemistry background. Their success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Environmental researchers from state universities requested permission to establish monitoring stations comparing water quality above and below their operations. Economic development officials inquired about their employment practices after noticing the cooperative hired more local workers at better wages than conventional mining operations. Most significant was the community transformation. Pineville had been declining for decades as young people left for urban opportunities and traditional industries contracted. Now, newfound optimism energized community planning. The cooperative's profit-sharing model meant extraction revenue circulated throughout the local economy rather than flowing to distant corporate headquarters. "We need to discuss expansion," Samantha Liu suggested during the April strategic planning meeting. Carter's documentation identifies at least 3 additional viable sites, each with unique characteristics and potential yields. The discussion that followed revealed the cooperative's evolving philosophy. Unlike corporate operations driven primarily by profit maximization, their deliberations balanced economic considerations against environmental impact, community benefit, and long-term sustainability. Site 2 has higher silver concentration, Jim pointed out, but it's closer to the main watershed sources. Any contamination there would have wider impact. Site 3 shows lower concentration but significantly reduced environmental sensitivity. Rachel countered, highlighting sections of their environmental impact studies. The surrounding geology provides natural containment, and our water quality improvement system would actually benefit a stream currently showing historical contamination. The unanimous decision to prioritize Site 3 over potentially more profitable alternatives reflected their commitment to Carter's vision: responsible stewardship, taking only what could be harvested without damaging systems, sustaining both natural environment and human community. While Rachel focused on operational decisions, Lily and Mia were developing their own relationships with the mountain community. Lily's first steps had been on cabin floorboards, once hidden under decades of dust. Her first words shaped by the rhythms of rural life: rather than suburban isolation. Mia had developed remarkable environmental awareness, distinguishing native plants from invasives and understanding watershed dynamics in ways that amazed adult observers. One evening in early May, as Rachel helped Mia identify wildflower specimens for her nature journal, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside the cabin. The vehicle's immaculate finish contrasted sharply with the mud-spattered trucks typically seen on mountain roads. "Mr. Prescott is here," Mia announced, her expression darkening as she recognized the heritage mining executive. Despite her young age, she retained vivid memories of the custody battle and corporate intimidation tactics that had threatened their family. Edward Prescott emerged looking distinctly uncomfortable in the rural setting. His tailored suit and polished shoes seemed absurdly formal against the backdrop of their working homestead with its garden beds and solar array. "Ms. Morgan," he began, attempting cordial professionalism, "I hoped we might discuss recent developments in a civil manner." Rachel invited him inside with cautious courtesy. Despite their history of antagonism, she maintained professional respect for the adversary whose actions had ultimately strengthened their community resolve. The interior transformation clearly surprised him. What had once been a dusty, abandoned shelter now featured comfortable furnishings, modern appliances powered by renewable energy, and walls adorned with children's artwork alongside framed maps from Carter's collection. "Your operation at Willow Creek has attracted considerable attention," Prescott stated, declining offered tea. "Several environmental organizations are citing your filtration system as a new standard for responsible extraction. Even our board of directors has taken notice." Rachel waited, sensing the real purpose of his visit remained unstated. "Heritage Mining is prepared to offer you a position as sustainability consultant," he finally continued. "$300,000 annually plus relocation allowance to Denver and comprehensive benefits, including college funds for your daughters." The proposal hung in the air between them, not just employment, but a complete life change. Return to urban conveniences, financial security, prestigious professional recognition. Everything she might have wanted before discovering Carter's legacy. "And the cooperative," Rachel asked, though she already knew the answer, "would retain its legal rights, of course, but without your specific expertise, they'd likely find implementation challenging. Heritage would eventually acquire their operations through normal market mechanisms." The corporate strategy revealed itself clearly unable to defeat the community model. Directly, they sought to remove its central knowledge holder, allowing the enterprise to gradually collapse before absorbing its assets. "Mr. Prescott, I appreciate the recognition implied by your offer," Rachel replied carefully. "But my work here isn't just professional. It's personal commitment to values I share with this community. I'm not interested in helping Heritage adopt superficial sustainability practices while maintaining extractive fundamentals." His expression hardened. "We expected that response. Therefore, I'm authorized to present an alternative proposal." He opened his briefcase, removing a document folder. $3 million for full rights to Carter's documentation and immediate dissolution of your partnership with the cooperative. You and your daughters could relocate anywhere financially independent for life. The figure exceeded anything Rachel had imagined during those desperate days when 50 cents represented their total investment capacity. It offered immediate security educational opportunities for her daughters without constant struggle, freedom from the endless challenges of pioneering a new resource management approach. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that life, a comfortable home in a city with cultural opportunities for her daughters, no more battles against corporate opposition, no more 4 a.m. problem-solving sessions when extraction equipment malfunctioned. Then she remembered Carter's words, "I'm preserving this information instead of filing claims myself because I've seen what happens when mining companies prioritize profit over community welfare. The damage they cause lasts for generations, long after the valuable minerals are extracted and shipped away." "My answer remains no," she stated firmly. William Carter walked away from his family fortune because he understood that some principles matter more than profit. We've inherited not just his documentation, but his ethical framework. The silver will be extracted responsibly or not at all. Prescott's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine frustration. "You realize this isn't over. My company has resources you can't imagine, legal strategies your cooperative hasn't anticipated. We've simply been calculating whether removing obstacles through cooperation might prove more efficient than eliminating them through competition. The threat lingered in the air after his departure, his SUV leaving deep tracks in the muddy spring road. Rachel watched until the vehicle disappeared around the bend, then found Mia standing beside her, small hands slipping into hers. $3 million is a lot, the child observed with a characteristic directness. It is, Rachel agreed, but some things matter more than money. Mia nodded, processing this principle with the particular seriousness only children can manage. Like our home and our friends and taking care of the mountains. Exactly like that. Heritage Mining's next move came swiftly. Within 2 weeks, they filed permit applications for 3 massive extraction operations on properties adjacent to cooperative holdings. The proposed developments dwarf the cooperative's careful operations, with extraction volumes requiring substantial infrastructure development and creating significant environmental disruption. The public hearing on these permits filled the courthouse beyond capacity. Cooperative members presented detailed analyses of watershed impacts, wildlife corridor disruption, and long-term environmental costs. Heritage representatives countered with economic projections, job creation estimates, and technical assurances about contemporary extraction methods. The fundamental conflict transcended specific permit details, addressing different visions for regional development. Heritage represented conventional extractive economics, maximizing short-term yield, accepting environmental impacts as unnecessary costs, prioritizing shareholder value over community concerns. The cooperative embodied an alternative approach, balanced extraction, environmental preservation, equitable distribution of benefits throughout affected communities. Rachel addressed the county commissioners directly, complementing technical data with ethical framework. William Carter's vision wasn't about preventing development. It was about ensuring development serves community welfare rather than corporate profit. The silver beneath these mountains belongs to no individual or corporation. It represents natural wealth that should benefit those who live with both the resource and the consequences of its extraction. The commissioners delayed their decision, requesting additional environmental impact assessments before approving such substantial development. This procedural victory bought valuable time, but everyone recognized the fundamental conflict remained unresolved. During this period of uneasy equilibrium, Rachel took Mia to examine one of Carter's mapped sites not yet developed by the cooperative. While reviewing his geological notes, she noticed something odd. Discrepancies between coordinates and descriptive text suggested deliberate alteration. "Mommy, these numbers don't match the pictures." Mia observed, her growing literacy allowing her to recognize patterns in Carter's documentation. Though just 4 years old, Mia had absorbed the mapping principles Rachel had been teaching her during their frequent exploration adventures. The child's instinctive observation sparked deeper investigation, revealing a pattern across multiple documents. Carter had systematically adjusted certain coordinates, shifting them subtly from actual deposit locations. The alterations weren't random errors, but deliberate obfuscation, creating a secondary layer of information accessible only to someone who recognized the pattern. "This is brilliant," Rachel realized, reviewing the maps with fresh understanding. Carter created a verification system. If someone just found his papers and tried to follow the coordinates exactly, they'd miss substantial deposits. But if you actually live here, get to know the landscape intimately, you'd recognize the landmarks he's referencing in his descriptions. This revelation explained why Heritage Mining's geological surveys hadn't identified all deposits documented in Carter's records. Their corporate teams had treated coordinates as literal navigation points rather than components in a larger system, requiring intimate knowledge of the landscape. More significantly, the adjusted coordinates pointed to several substantial deposits on lands currently outside both cooperative control and Heritage's acquisition targets areas, remaining available for new claims if properly documented. Samantha Liu helped them file claims on these newly identified deposits, using the cooperative's established legal framework to secure rights before Heritage Mining recognized the pattern. Each new claim strengthened the community model, expanding sustainable operations while preserving core environmental principles. The cooperative's growing success attracted attention beyond local boundaries. In early June, a woman in tailored business attire arrived unannounced at their monthly meeting, observing proceedings with professional interest before introducing herself. "Catherine Bennett, Summit Conservation Trust," she stated, extending her business card. "Our organization has been monitoring your work with considerable interest. What you've accomplished here represents something unprecedented in modern resource development. The conversation that followed revealed unexpected dimensions to their modest operation. Summit Conservation Trust managed a substantial endowment dedicated to promoting sustainable resource practices throughout Western states. They had documented dozens of community conflicts with extractive industries searching for replicable models balancing economic development with environmental protection. What makes your operation unique, Bennett explained during their tour of Willow Creek, is that you've created a functional alternative to corporate extraction rather than merely opposing it. You're demonstrating that community-based resource management can be both economically viable and environmentally responsible. Her analysis cut directly to the core principle that had guided their development, proving possibility rather than simply protesting existing practices. Between unregulated extraction and complete preservation lies sustainable development, balanced resource utilization, respecting both human needs and environmental integrity. Summit Conservation Trust's interest culminated in a proposal delivered the following week, a substantial funding package that would expand their model throughout the region. The trust would provide capital for developing additional claims on environmentally suitable sites, while the cooperative would supply expertise in sustainable extraction methods and community governance structures. This represents validation of everything William Carter hoped to achieve, Samantha observed during the emergency committee meeting called to discuss the proposal. His vision of responsible resource development will extend far beyond this single valley. The partnership offered more than financial support. It provided institutional backing against continuing corporate pressure connections to broader environmental networks and resources to document their methods for application in other regions facing similar conflicts between community welfare and extractive industries. For Rachel and her daughters personally, the partnership solved lingering financial challenges. The funding package included educational trusts for cooperative members' children, ensuring Mia and Lily could pursue education without constraint. It established research grants for developing improved extraction methods with reduced environmental impact, allowing Rachel to apply her scientific background to questions that had concerned Carter decades earlier. As summer progressed, an unexpected development arose from an unlikely source. Daniel Williams, Rachel's ex-husband, contacted her requesting a meeting. After the humiliating defeat of his corporate-backed custody challenge, he had maintained distance, his sporadic calls to the girls becoming increasingly infrequent. They met at a cafe in Pineville, neutral territory that still placed Rachel firmly within her community support network. Daniel appeared changed, the arrogant confidence replaced by subdued reflection, designer clothes exchanged for business, casual that wouldn't draw attention in the rural setting. "I've been following news about your cooperative," he began awkwardly. "The Economic Development Journal I subscribed to ran a feature last month." Rachel waited, sensing rehearsed dialogue. Her relationship with Daniel had evolved from love to conflict to distant formality, their only remaining connection the daughters they shared. "My business ventures haven't gone well," he continued, studying his coffee. "The investment group folded after multiple failures. I've been consulting, but—" He shrugged, leaving implications unstated. The contrast between their trajectories hung unspoken between them. Daniel had pursued conventional success through high-risk ventures, prioritizing potential financial returns over relationships and stability. Rachel had invested in community principle, in sustainable development, finding unexpected prosperity through values-based decisions. "I've been thinking about what you've built here," he finally continued. "The cooperative model, the environmental approach. My background in business development might be useful to your operation. I could help with financial modeling, growth strategy, investment structures." The proposal stunned Rachel. Daniel seeking involvement in her work represented complete role reversal from their marriage, when he had dismissed her concerns about his business decisions as unnecessary worry. Now he sought participation in her success, implicitly acknowledging the validity of principles he had once rejected. "This isn't about inserting myself into your life," he added, correctly reading her hesitation. "It's about contributing something worthwhile while being a more present father to the girls. I've missed too much already." The cooperative's governance structure provided framework for Rachel's response. "Employment decisions aren't mine alone. The management committee evaluates all applications based on skills, community commitment, and alignment with our operating principles. You're welcome to submit a formal application which will receive fair consideration like any other. Daniel nodded, accepting both the professional distance and the implied challenge to demonstrate genuine commitment rather than opportunistic interest. Whether his transformation reflected authentic growth or merely pragmatic adaptation remained unclear, but the cooperative's democratic structure would ensure appropriate evaluation. By midsummer, the Carter Resource Cooperative had established controlling interests in most viable silver deposits throughout the region. Heritage Mining maintained large-scale operations on permitted properties, but found themselves unable to expand beyond initial holdings. The corporate extraction model and community-based alternative now operated in parallel, creating natural experiment in contrasting approaches to resource management. The differences became increasingly apparent as operations progressed. Heritage sites featured standard industrial mining, large equipment, substantial surface disruption, visible impact on surrounding landscapes. The cooperative's operations maintained Carter's lighter approach, targeted extraction, minimal surface disturbance, continuous environmental monitoring, and remediation. Most telling were water quality measurements taken downstream from both operations. Despite Heritage's technical compliance with regulatory requirements, their sites showed expected patterns of incremental degradation, not enough to trigger violations but sufficient to demonstrate cumulative impact. By contrast, the cooperative sites maintained their unusual achievement of improved downstream conditions, filtration systems, removing historical contaminants while preventing new pollution. These empirical differences attracted attention beyond local communities. Environmental researchers from several universities established monitoring projects comparing the two models. Economic analysts studied distribution of benefits, corporate operations generating concentrated profits for distant shareholders versus cooperative approaches circulating gains throughout local communities. Government agencies examined regulatory frameworks enabling or constraining different development models. Rachel found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant, explaining the cooperative's approach to audiences ranging from environmental conferences to legislative committees. The chemistry teacher, who had once spent 50 cents in desperate search of shelter, now advised policymakers on sustainable resource management frameworks. A significant challenge emerged in August when Heritage Mining attempted to restrict cooperative access to essential processing facilities. Having acquired control over regional smelting operations, the corporation announced policy changes that would prioritize processing for affiliated operations while implementing substantial surcharges for independent producers. The cooperative responded by accelerating development of their own processing capabilities. The Summit Conservation Partnership provided capital for small-scale processing facilities using experimental technologies that reduced both energy consumption and environmental impact. What began as defensive necessity evolved into another competitive advantage. Localized processing eliminated transportation costs while providing additional employment opportunities. Heritage's increasingly aggressive competition prompted a surprising development. Several mid-level managers from their regional operations approached the cooperative with interest in transitioning to community-based extraction. These industry professionals had observed the cooperative's success firsthand and recognized the potential for balancing economic opportunity with environmental responsibility. The most unexpected validation came from an international mining industry conference, where Heritage Mining and the Carter Cooperative were invited to present contrasting approaches to silver extraction. Technical data from both operations revealed that while Heritage's methods yielded higher short-term production, the cooperative's approach demonstrated superior long-term sustainability metrics, including groundwater quality, soil stability, and habitat preservation. This professional recognition coincided with the arrival of a letter that completed their connection to Carter's legacy. The Denver law firm's envelope contained documentation showing that William Carter had established a conditional trust before forfeiting his inheritance rights. The trust stipulated that should anyone successfully implement his sustainable mining framework, they would be entitled to certain reserved assets from the original family holdings. Samantha Liu vetted the letter's authenticity, confirming through legal channels that the trust indeed existed and had remained dormant for decades. William Carter had created not just documentation, but legal mechanisms to support whoever might eventually continue his work, providing resources that would sustain their efforts beyond initial implementation. The trust's assets, conservatively managed for 50 years, had grown to substantial value. Not the billions that might have come from unrestricted extraction, but sufficient to ensure the cooperative's continuing operation regardless of market fluctuations or corporate opposition. Carter had sacrificed immediate wealth but preserved resources for future implementation of his vision, believing that eventually someone would value principle over profit. This final piece of Carter's legacy arrived as the cooperative faced its greatest expansion opportunity. Catherine Bennett had secured funding partnerships that would adapt their model to mineral deposits throughout Western states, creating a network of community-based resource management organizations operating on similar principles. The trust resources would provide essential stability during this transition, ensuring the model could develop sufficient scale to influence industry practices more broadly. The network launched at a regional conference hosted in Pineville, attracting representatives from dozens of communities facing similar conflicts between extractive economics and environmental concerns. Rachel presented the cooperative's results 2 years of operational data demonstrating that community governance could achieve sustainable outcomes while generating sufficient economic returns to support affected populations. Most compelling was the cooperative's core message: another approach is possible. The silver beneath Carter's mountains had provided not just material wealth, but proof of concept for management frameworks applicable across diverse contexts. The conference represented a turning point for heritage mining as well. Recognizing the growing influence of community-based approaches, their board of directors initiated strategic review of extraction practices throughout their operations. While maintaining corporate structure and profit orientation, they began incorporating elements of the Carter model into their sustainability planning, particularly water management techniques and community engagement practices. This unexpected corporate evolution prompted mixed reactions within the cooperative. Some viewed it as victory forcing industry-wide improvement through demonstrated alternatives. Others remained skeptical, seeing superficial adoption of sustainable practices without fundamental changes in corporate priorities. Rachel recognized both perspectives, understanding that meaningful change often emerged from compromise between ideal principles and practical implementation. For Mia and Lily, the cooperative's success created childhood unlike anything Rachel had imagined during those desperate days at the foreclosure auction. Mia, now regarded as the cooperative's youngest environmental monitor, had developed her own system for tracking seasonal changes in creek water clarity using colored stones as reference points. Her observations were included in official monitoring reports, her childish handwriting preserved alongside scientific data as testament to intergenerational commitment. Lily, though still too young for formal responsibilities, had become the cooperative's unofficial mascot. Her presence at meetings and operational sites reminded members of their fundamental purpose: preserving environmental integrity for future generations. The transformation from desperate shelter-seeking to community leadership had occurred within her lifetime, a living embodiment of the cooperative's core narrative. 1 year after Judge Stone's ruling, Rachel took her daughters to Carter's favorite Overlook Ridge, providing views across the entire valley. Summer wildflowers bloomed among granite outcroppings, creating vibrant contrast with the deep green forest below. The landscape showed evidence of both development approaches, Heritage's industrial operations contained within permitted boundaries, the cooperative's lighter impact sites distributed according to Carter's careful mapping. Lily toddled among the flowers, delighting in butterflies and berry bushes, while Mia stood beside Rachel at the vista point, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "Do you think we made the right choices?" Rachel asked, watching sunlight play across the valley that had become their home. Mia considered the question with characteristically careful deliberation. "I think we made Carter's choices. He wrote everything down because he believed the right people would eventually find it and use it properly. And you think we're the right people? I think we became the right people by choosing to honor his legacy instead of just profiting from it. We could have taken Mr. Prescott's money and lived in a big city house with fancy things. Instead, we stayed and built something that matters beyond just us." The transformation wasn't merely financial, though their material circumstances had certainly improved beyond anything they could have imagined when purchasing the cabin. The deeper change involved purpose and relationship, connecting to a legacy extending backward through Carter's work and forward through the cooperative's continuing development. Their 50-cent gamble had yielded returns measured not just in dollars, but in community bonds, ethical framework, and demonstrable alternatives to extractive economics. The desperate woman who had bid on an abandoned cabin and the children who had followed her into uncertainty had found not just shelter but purpose, continuing work one principled man had begun decades earlier that would now extend into future generations. As evening approached, they descended toward home. The cooperative's operations were winding down for the day workers returning to families and community. Heritage's industrial site continued running additional shifts, maximizing production through extended hours. The contrast in approaches remained visible, but the competitive dynamic had evolved toward uneasy coexistence, each model demonstrating viability within different priority frameworks. Inside the cabin, Carter's journal lay open on the table where Rachel had been studying it that morning. His final entry provided guidance that had shaped every decision since discovering his documentation. The mountains will outlast us all. Our responsibility is to take only what we need and leave the land better than we found it. Mia helped Lily wash her hands for dinner, while Rachel prepared a meal using vegetables from their expanded garden. Their conversation flowed easily between daily practicalities and larger questions about resource management, personal responsibilities, and community development. The integration of immediate needs with long-term vision reflected Carter's approach, practical engagement with tangible reality, guided by ethical principles transcending individual circumstance. As the girls settled into bed that night, Rachel stood at the cabin window, watching moonlight silver the landscape that had become their sanctuary and purpose. The desperate bid that had seemed like madness to courthouse onlookers had transformed not just their individual circumstances, but resource management practices throughout the region. In her journal that evening, Rachel made a simple entry that captured both their personal journey and broader significance. 2 years since discovering Carter's legacy, the cooperative network launches next month across 3 states, Mia developing her own environmental monitoring methods, Lily thriving in our community, all from initial investment of 50 cents and commitment to principles that transcend immediate circumstances. She closed the journal, understanding that while their story might seem extraordinary, it represented possibility available whenever desperate circumstances meet principled determination. Carter's greatest legacy wasn't the silver he documented, but the vision he'd preserved, belief that responsible stewardship could balance resource utilization with environmental preservation, immediate needs with generational responsibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, expanding operations, training, additional communities, continuing innovation in extraction methods. But tonight she could appreciate how that moment of desperate courage at an auction betting everything on nothing at all had created ripples of transformation, extending far beyond one family's struggle for shelter, proving that sometimes the most significant changes begin with the smallest investments, guided by the clearest principles.